Yesterday, a video popped up on my social media that really made an impression on me and that really inspired me. It was a video that totally would have mystified me just a couple years ago. The video showed 6 people dancing in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a strip mall next to a busy street. Now, what would have surprised me a few years ago is that 3 of these folks were wearing inflatable animal costumes. There was a blue shark, a green frog, and a brown dinosaur. The person in the dinosaur costume carried a sign that said, "I am Antifa." Another person carried an American flag turned upside down, a traditional way of saying that our country is in distress. In Portland, in Chicago, and apparently also in Tulsa, folks have been dressing up in animal costumes to protest the administration's immigration crackdowns and its drift toward authoritarianism. In a climate in which protesters are being called violent extremists, I find the response to dress up as animals to be absolutely brilliant. But what really made an impression on me was the sign of the person in the dinosaur costume. I am Antifa. Antifa comes from the term anti-fascist. While various protesters over the years have identified as Antifa, Antifa is not an organized group. And yet this administration has villainized Antifa and said that it is a terrorist organization. A person anywhere in this country, but especially in Oklahoma, appearing in public with a sign that says, "I am Antifa," is a courageous person. This is a brave act because we live in a time of legitimate fear, especially if we are part of a marginalized group, whether we are LGBTQ, people of color, not American citizens, or hold various other identities, including working for the federal government. It can be scary to speak out. Even for folks who are not part of marginalized groups, voicing opinions, political opinions, can be worrying in this climate. We've all seen the images of masked federal officers detaining people without cause. We've read about the Justice Department going after the perceived enemies of the administration. These are uncertain and fearful times. A midrash on this week's Parsha goes into detail about what it's like to be afraid of leaders. Toward the end of the 2 stories of creation that we read about in this Parsha, Parshat Bereshit, we read about the Nephilim. These are giants who roam the land shortly before God floods the earth, and then we read about the story of Noah. The plain meaning of what the Torah says about the Nephilim would make us think that the Nephilim are admirable. The Nephilim are described as, quote, the heroes of old, the men of great name. But interestingly, the sages of the Midrash, whose wisdom was written down centuries after the Torah was completed, these people took a very negative view of the Nephilim. They are blamed for causing the wickedness that leads God to want to start over with the flood. One sage tells us, and I quote, "They brought desolation into the world, and they caused the world to become desolate." Why are these giant creatures seen as being evil by the rabbis? One of their main characteristics, as explored by the rabbis, is that they induce fear. A sage explains that anyone who saw the Nephilim, their heart would become as soft as wax. And I love that image. Their heart would become as soft as wax. The rabbis also describe them as being wealthy and wearing ornate necklaces and being enormous. The Midrash says that their femurs were 18 cubits long, which is approximately 18 yards long. It's interesting to think about our forebears who put together this Midrash. They presumably lived under the rule of people who behaved like the Nephilim that they described. Rulers who were wealthy, who thought of themselves as having great names, who saw themselves as giants, and who ruled by fear. Fear here is a really important part of what the sages say about the Nephilim and their analysis of how they hold power. The Nephilim rule because they invoke fear in the masses. This is one of their defining characteristics. Our tradition has two important things to teach us about tyrants, such as the Nephilim. The first thing our tradition has to teach about them is that there is always an authority that is higher than them. Even when they have worldly power and are able to create destruction, our tradition insists that we answer to a higher power than them. We read in the book of 2 Samuel how the prophet Nathan rebukes King David and reminds him that despite him being the king, he remains a man who must answer to God. Even when we have legitimate fear, even when the Nephilim have power, we remember that we have what ultimately matters is where we stand in terms of what is right and what is wrong. Regardless of how upside down the world may seem, our moral imperatives and our ultimate purpose matter most. The second lesson our tradition offers in standing up to tyrants is to put them into the context of the broader Jewish story. That is what the sages who wrote the Midrash did. Reading over the description of the Nephilim, from their necklaces to their size, to their fear and the destruction they cause, it seems as though they are metaphorically describing leaders they knew all too well. And they're placing the Nephilim into the stories they tell themselves in order to understand the Torah. Centuries later, we can draw from the Jewish tradition to say that we recognize the Nephilim of our time and we understand the importance of overcoming fear. Whether in a parking lot in Tulsa dressed up in a dinosaur costume, or perhaps at the No Kings rally here in San Francisco tomorrow, we overthrow the Nephilim of our time by not being afraid. We show up, we speak out, we act courageously. The Nephilim of our time want us to be scared. They want us to think that speaking out against them will fail and that it will put us at personal risk. If we let them scare us into inaction, they could very well get what they want. As we head into this Shabbat, which for some of us will include attending the No Kings March tomorrow, let's remind ourselves what our tradition teaches us about the Nephilim. We answer to an ultimate authority that is greater than them. And part of our tradition, dating back centuries, is to identify them and to place them in the context of our broader story. When we do this, we can stand up to them. When we do this, we cannot be afraid. Shabbat Shalom.